The European Parliament exists since 1957. It is basically the Parliamentary Assembly of the European Union. So nowadays we have 751 members from the 28 member states of the European Union. We are the co-legislator of all the legislation at European level. The Parliament nowadays is basically the place where citizens' voices are being heard and where laws are voted on. In Europe, European unification started in the early 50s on two different treaties, one on the Nuclear Atomic Energy Agency, Atomic Energy Community, and the second one on energy and coal, because those were the industries that leaders wanted to pool. The German steel industry, the French steel industry, the coal industries, together with the Luxembourgish, the Belgian, the Dutch and the Italian industries, to establish peace on a continent devastated by two world wars at the time. Mm-hmm. People came out of the trenches and said, well, no more war, let's do something more reasonable, let's do something better. And they came together and said, well, let's put our economies together, let's put our political systems a bit more together, and let's create peace here on the European continent.
So the economic aspect is covered by the common market.
Yes.
And what is the political aspect of the European Union?
Within the European Parliament we have 751 members, and each country has representatives which are more or less in relation to its population size. Okay. So you have Germany as nowadays the biggest country in Europe.
And population.
In population. Mm-hmm. They have 96 members, and you have smaller member states like Luxembourg, Estonia and Cyprus, which have 6 members in the European Parliament. Mm-hmm. And all those members come together, do not sit together according to nationalities, but according to political affiliations. So like in a national parliament, like in a regional, like in a local parliament, you have the conservatives sitting together, you have the socialists sitting together, you have the liberals sitting together and voting together on European laws which are valid throughout the European Union, throughout 28 member states.
Okay. Do individual countries still have the last word in making changes?
That all comes down to the treaties. The treaties clearly say which political dossiers are being discussed at European level and decided at European level. So, for example, with regards to international commerce, foreign trade, it's the European Union which decides. It's not the individual member states anymore. The member states said, well, we are one common market, let's negotiate access rules to our markets together vis-à-vis countries like the US, Canada and others. So we see nowadays negotiations going on a transatlantic free trade agreement between the European Union and the US, and similar discussions, similar negotiations are going on with other countries around the world. And it's the European Parliament together with the member states government who come together in a second legislative body, which is called the Council of Ministers. It's the European Parliament and this Council of Ministers who have to agree on legislation, and only once those two chambers agree on a piece of legislation, this legislation becomes a law applicable in all the 28 member states of the European Union.
Okay. Are the same members of the European Parliament as the common market, or some belong to one association but not to the common market?
No, the common market is fully part of what we call the acquis communautaire, so the bodies of law. It's not only the common market, we also have rules on asylum, we have rules on environmental protection,
immigration.
We have immigration rules, we have common consumer protection laws, we have air passenger rights harmonized and so on. So really many things which do not only in the past in the beginning, we made rules for enterprises, but nowadays, with legislation voted by the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers,
Applies to
we have laws which apply to individuals as well. Nowadays in Europe, between the 28 member states, you can roam around with your mobile phone at very low charges. In the past, you had to pay extra fees once you crossed borders. And we are in the process of doing away with that, for example. This is something very
by regulating the communication system. How about foreign policy?
Foreign policy is a shared competency between member states and the European Union. So we have a high representative, at the time being it's Baroness Ashton, who coordinates the foreign policy of member states, and where once we have found common ground, Europe speaks with one voice with the outside world. We have seen in the past 5 years progress on this issue, especially, for example, in the talks on the nuclear program of Iran, where the European Union played together with its international partners a decisive role in the negotiations with Iran.
Is there some resentment from some individual countries when the European Union decides something that the individual country doesn't agree with, and the Parliament, the European Parliament, prevails over this smaller country? Is there any resentment there, any tension, any contradictions in the...
Well, according to the treaties, this is a possibility, but of course the whole European project, if you look at this exhibition in my bag, which shows the cruelties of the First World War, the whole European project nowadays is a project of peace and of finding compromises. So we always try to find compromises, but nevertheless in some instances this may occur that an individual country is not too happy about decisions taken at European level, but the member states have agreed to give certain responsibilities to the European level, and then you have to take majority votes at the European level, and everybody has to live with that.
So the individual countries cannot opt out in a policy that they don't agree with.
This is only possible in the context of the treaties. There are certain opt-outs foreseen in the treaties. If you look, for example, at the euro, the common currency, not all the member states are part of it, some for economic reasons, others because they have agreed on an opt-out with all the other member states.
Okay, so there are some exceptions to the rule, like in anything else.
Well, the rules include already certain exceptions, so it's not an exception to the rule as such, because it's in the rule book, if I may say so.
And defense, you don't have equivalent to NATO, or you are just part of NATO?
Most member states are part of NATO. We try nevertheless to coordinate defense policies. It's part of the foreign policy anyhow.
France and Germany are not fighting anymore, but the implication of war is more in third world countries. The intervention of Europeans and United States and to other countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, Libya. My question is implying that the war in other countries is supported by the Western countries or by Russia, right? The Russia, China. They're big empires contributing to wars in Africa or in the Middle East. What is the position of the Parliament, the European Parliament, in regards to foreign policy that affects with the war making in other countries?
Well, I mean, if you don't have means on the ground, it's the example that you can set by showing what you have been doing and by also appealing to political leaders. And it's also clear that in certain, if you see that the conflict is over, trying to put up institutions again, contributing to that, it's also one of the issues that the European Union, not only the Parliament, but also the European Commission, for example, and the External Action Service are working on once the fighting is over.
With aid, perhaps, peace is springs out of inequality, and some countries have more inequality between the rich and the poor. And if there's more inequality, therefore there's going to be more unrest. How is the Parliament dealing with that problem of inequality, which probably each country have different rules?
Inequality, or the question of,
Well,
comes down to taxation and
Yeah.
social policies. This is mainly an issue for the member states, because the competencies remains with the member states on the larger parts of these dossiers. Nevertheless, the European Parliament plays also a decisive role, especially on human rights issues, where we look into the situation of member states, but also into what's going on in third countries. So every plenary session of the European Parliament, you typically have 2 or 3 hours which are being devoted to questions, to exclusive questions of human rights. And the European Parliament, since 1988, discerns also the Sakharov Prize for Human Rights. The first laureate was, by the way, Nelson Mandela. Last year it was Malala, this Pakistani girl who received it. And by this, the European Parliament also tries to reward people who defend and fight for human rights around the world.
What is the position of the European Union in regards to migrant workers that don't get full citizenship but are only accepted as temporary workers?
Within the European Union, every union citizen has the right to live, to work where he wants within the union. If we talk now about people coming from outside the European Union, we have certain rules on immigration, we see that there is a real problem if you look into what's happening in the Mediterranean, where we see refugees coming to islands, to the little island of Lampedusa, which happens to be Italian territory, just off the Lebanese, just off the Tunisian coast. There we see problems, but we cannot solve all those problems within Europe. We have to solve those problems also at the root. That means in Africa, and the European Union is also one of the biggest donors of development aid nowadays. And of course, what's happening somewhere in Africa also has an impact on what's happening in Europe.
All right, and what is your relation with the World Peace Forum? What is the Parliament? How is the Parliament supporting the World Peace Forum?
We are offering our room. We are offering our rooms today to the World Peace Forum, because we see that they are trying to bring together peacemakers from around the world, and if we can contribute on the basis of the experience here in Europe, where since the 1950s we managed to have peace in the western part within the European Union, within the European communities, that others can profit of our experiences here. And you can see how we did it at a time where arch enemies like France and Germany came together after the war and said, let's forget the past, let's build the future together. If other regions can learn from this experience, then I think we have done a good job with the little contributions that we can make to such processes.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
I wish you well.
You too.